Speaker
Without objection.
Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, Mr. Hoyer, look, you've been kind to me, even when you and I, whether you remember, there was a while back where we were beating each other up on the floor, and then you gave me more time to finish, so sometimes you remember those things. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, I'm well caffeinated and I'm angry. So let's actually have some fun on the truth with math. And I'm terrified what's going on around here because we're making crap up. So let's actually do math. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, this is what we're borrowing per second over the last 12 months. Every single second, we're borrowing $72,932. Every second, we borrow $72,000, and $20,000 of it is just interest, and it gets dramatically worse between now and the rest of the decade. So there's a punchline here I need you to understand. How many times have you listened to members walk behind these microphones and do this? Well, I don't get to vote on mandatory spending. I only vote on discretionary. Seriously, you've been here how long, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem? It's our mantra. Well, I vote on defense and non-defense discretionary, and that's like 30% of the budget. It's actually closer to 27, but well, guess what? Every dime we as members of Congress now vote on is borrowed. It's all borrowed money. So look, I threw together this chart. Thank you for staff. But in the current budget year, the appropriation was about 1.8 trillion, 1.813, and since the July update, we've spent about 1.7 trillion on discretionary. This is not Medicare. This is not Social Security. That's this orange part here. But we're functioning in the last 12 months. We have borrowed 2.3 trillion. Does anyone see the math problem? The 2023 budget discretionary spending was going to be $831 billion. And we're going to borrow when this fiscal year is over. My math is crouching in on 2.2 trillion. Some of my staff thinks it's only going to be 2.1. What's $100 billion between friends? But I need you to process what I'm saying. If anyone out there is listening, if there's any staffers sitting in your office watching the television, understand everything your member of Congress votes on. Everything is borrowed money. Tell me, do you remember it was a year ago? Actually, let's actually go back where I can say something personal. In February, March, I came behind this very microphone and I predicted saying, do you know, I think we're actually heading towards borrowing 1.8 trillion. And I got mocked. I have to apologize. I was wrong. It wasn't 1.8 trillion. We're heading towards 2.1, 2.2. It's much worse. And you just heard the left talking about how wonderful everything is. Explain to me how in May last year, a year ago, May 22, we thought the budget deficit for this year would be about mid-800s, $860, $870 billion, and now we're heading to 2.2. What happened? Medicare costs went up dramatically. Tax receipts have fallen. So you heard about how wonderful this economy is. Isn't it neat? We're doing all these subsidized projects. Government is handing out money to anyone who wants to build a factory. Yay, socialized, nationalized economy. We functionally soft nationalized the chip industry. Isn't it wonderful? Think of what's going on. And yet the tax revenues have fallen actually fairly dramatically. Brilliant economics once again from what the left did last year. And then the third thing no one seems to want to fixate on, that Inflation Reduction Act that they passed, that they were celebrating here. If you even read the left-wing economists in their journals, okay, about half of inflation was supply chain stress, and yes, half of it was the excessive spending. Okay. So the people in my community, unless you've had a 20% pay hike if you live in the Phoenix, Scottsdale area, you are poorer today. You are poorer today than you were 24 months ago. Will the left take responsibility for that? Will they take responsibility for the 50% of it? And this is the insanity, and the wheels are coming off, and no one else seems willing to come behind these microphones and tell the truth. What's happening? Every dime we vote on, because remember, Social Security, veterans benefits, those things are on autopilot. They're mandatory, they're earned benefits, they're a formula. No one here votes on them. It's borrowed money. So the old days when you heard Republicans come behind the microphone saying, well, if we would just get rid of waste and fraud, if we would just get rid of foreign aid, we'll be fine. Foreign aid's about 12 days of borrowing. And I'm going to show you a number of things where the Democrats, the left, makes crap up. The dollar amounts, well, if we would just tax rich people more, if we would just get rid of the threshold on Social Security, I'm going to show you that it gets nowhere near the types of monies they misrepresent to you. We won't use the word lie tonight. I'm going to try to do my best. All right. So we're just going to run through a number of these because I gave away a little time and I only have a half an hour tonight. Actually, I probably only have 20 minutes left. Trying to actually start to demonstrate how fragile we are. There was a bond auction about 5 hours ago, of 30-year paper here, and it all sold at the very top of the market. Basically meaning if you thought interest rates were going down tomorrow, they're not. And you're starting to see actually how fragile we are. We're starting to look at numbers within 10 years. Our interest rate calculations on what we're going to pay on the debt are absolutely wrong. They're absolutely wrong. We're now starting to see math saying we may be missing in 9 budget years from now. Total interest was predicted to be as high as $1.4 trillion, just the interest. I need you now to add another $315 billion on it, and that difference is just the marginal interest rate increases we've had over the last several weeks. When you're borrowing $26 trillion from the public, when you hear the 32, 33 trillion, a bunch of that is money actually we borrow from the trust funds, which are also running out of money. So why this is important? This big red hump here, that's defense spending for 2024. It's like $820, $30 billion. This one here is interest, just interest we're going to pay in 2024. My math is there's very high likelihood interest this government pays in next fiscal year will be equal to every dime we spend in defense. Interest will equal the defense budget. So next time you're talking to a leftist who says, if you would just cut defense spending, interest now is equaling defense, and that's next year. That's the budget we're working on right now. Understand how much trouble we're in. And I'm going to go through some of these fast because there's not a lot of time. But this one is really important. Almost no one here understands or talks about it. It's not the $2 trillion we're going to issue as new debt next year. It's functionally the almost $10 trillion that comes to market next year. We have about $7.6 trillion that gets refinanced. Those are bonds from years ago that were at the remarkably low interest rates. They're coming due. We're going to bring almost $10 trillion to market of U.S. sovereign debt next year. What happens when we bring that debt at these new higher interest rates? Anyone here paying attention to, we've gone off the rails. Oh, but we don't care. That's math. We don't do math here. This is a math-free zone. Pay attention to this. This will be a story as we move through next year when you bring $10 trillion to market. And you got to convince investors to buy this debt that they won't get a better rate of return if they go buy high-quality corporate paper over here, or they should roll over the debt and buy another U.S. sovereign. And at the same time, we're going to be issuing a couple trillion also additional virgin debt. This is where we're at. And you start to look at, we were doing this calculation a couple months ago, that just by raising the interest by a single point, which we've more than exceeded, you start to look out a few years, and by the 10-year window, you might be having a $3.7 trillion a year shortfall. A deficit of $3.7 trillion, and it's mostly that growth. This is not calculating in the new higher medical costs. This is just basically interest fragility. And this board is important to my Democrat brothers and sisters who basically, the comment I always get, well, if we just would tax rich people more. Please buy a calculator. Read some of the documents that your own leftist economists produce, because if we would confiscate, a lot of caffeine today, confiscate next year, if we would confiscate every dime, so you make $500,000, the next dollar you make, we just take it. Government takes everything. So you make $500,000, everything up. So the guy makes $1 billion next year, we take every dime of it. That would bring in about $1.5 trillion. A lot of money. This number's already wrong. Before we were projecting a $1.7 trillion shortfall budget deficit in 2024. Now we're thinking if this year's 2.2, what will next year's be? But confiscate everyone over $500,000. How many times have you heard, if we just tax the rich, we'll be fine? That's an absolute fraud. Remember, the number one driver of debt here is not Democrats, it's not Republicans, it's demographics. The one thing we're not allowed to talk about. We're not allowed to tell the truth. We made promises and we have no cash to keep them. And at some point here, I'm going to set myself on fire after soaking in kerosene. We're going to talk about Social Security and how ugly the basic math is. Oh, let's actually start that right now. And look, some of these, we've put together these slides just trying to demonstrate. On this side over here, these are the taxes you've paid over your lifetime. The average couple. The average couple. The one bar here I want you to get your head around is this orange bar is Medicare. Do you see that gap? This is the benefits you receive. That gap from here to here, that right there, that's 75% of all future debt. We're not supposed to talk about this because it gets people unelected, but the fact of the matter is, unless we have a revolution in delivering the cost of health care, the 130, it may be dramatically more now, that number hasn't been updated in a while, of U.S. sovereign debt that we plan to issue over the next 30 years, 75% of it is Medicare, 25% if we cover the shortfall in Social Security. I'm not going to make you go through that one. So let's actually have some fun with math. I had sort of a group discussion. Most of the room were people on the left, but they were very polite. Every other person claimed to have a PhD. And we got to discussion saying, hey, the actuary reports, the CBO basically saying 9 years from now, Social Security Trust Fund is empty. It's empty. So that first year, 2033, $616 billion is the shortfall. That if you're an average couple in America, that's a $17,200 cut to your Social Security check. We will double senior poverty. How many people have you seen come to this microphone and say, I give a damn about seniors. I don't want to double senior poverty. Have you seen the stories of how many baby boomers are starting to live on the streets in America? And the projections, this is an article today, and I think this was actually, God, I'm not even sure where this was published. Actually, it may have been Wall Street Journal today. Read the article. Understand what's happening, the fragility, and then we're going to tell these people we're taking 25% of their Social Security check from them? It's 9 years from now. But the problem is that first year, these short, let's just do 1 year math. 2033, that's $616 billion. Let's do the Democrats' suggestion. We're going to tax people over $400,000. Take everyone over $400,000, you hit for, so there's this donut hole. You pay your Social Security, your FICA tax up to $160,200. Then you don't pay anymore, but once you hit $400,000, everything up, you'll pay the 12.4% Social Security tax. Great. It's $80 billion. The shortfall is 616, but the Democrat solution is 80 billion. Does anyone see a math problem? So let's go on to the next one. Let's do the Bernie Sanders suggestion. Let's get rid of the capital. Every dime you earn, you're going to pay 12.4%. When you do the dynamic score on it, that's about 158 billion. Did I mention the first year shortfall of 616? 616 billion, removing the cap, tax everything, only produces $158 billion. What is that? 437 billion shortfall. What would you like to do? Where'd you like to get it? Democrat colleagues, you refuse to have the discussion how we're going to save Social Security and not do the immoral thing of double senior poverty. But you won't have the conversation because the president stood right there and said, you're not allowed to talk about Medicare and Social Security, and everyone applauded. Because they're going to do attack mail and attack television ads in your office because you talked about trying to do the moral thing and save this program. Mr. Speaker Pro Tem, how many minutes do I have?
The gentleman has 11 minutes.
Oh, good. We're going to have some fun here then. Thank you, Mr. Speaker Pro Tem. So, let's actually walk through what this means to you. You're right now expecting that 17,200, 17,400, there's a little dispute of is the cut you're getting in as an average couple in America in 9 years. Yay! Okay, but let's actually do that thing where we're only going to let the Democrats, they're going to tax everyone over 400,000. That cut now becomes 13,482. Remember, this is just on the first year. If you completely remove the cap and just tax every dime without the dynamic score of how much the economy you slowed down, the cut that average couple on Social Security is going to get is going to be approaching $11,000 a year. And that's the Democrats' moral solution. Does anyone here own a calculator? And then let's actually go a bit further. So the hard left here says, well, let's do the oligarch tax. And you go, huh? Well, this is a tax, it's unconstitutional, and I think in front of the Supreme Court this coming year, where the Democrat solution is, well, we know we've been lying to the public, but we're not going to tell them that, but we're going to offer another tax proposal where we're going to tax, the Democrats want to tax unearned capital gains. You go, huh? What's that? Well, you're rich. You have a building. You have a business. You have an asset here. You haven't sold it, but there's capital gains there. Every year, the government's going to come in and ask for part of it. If you're really rich, they might want 10% of it. But if you're only moderately rich, every year you might have to only pay 2%. But it would be paying unrealized capital gains because that's where the real money is. Except the problem is the fantasy of going at that money, and this is without a dynamic score. So how does it change behavior? Remember, taxes like this change behavior. We won't do the geeky economics. Produces about $137 billion. So that first year, it would produce $137 billion. Do you remember the previous board? Social Security has a $616 billion shortfall in the first year, and the most radical tax proposal produces $137 billion. Am I getting the point across? Do you understand how difficult these numbers are? And instead we're going to come and do theater. Oh, we're building another factory that there's no workers for and there's no one that actually wants the product, but we subsidized it. Yay, nationalized, sorry. In our office, our new nickname is we call this soft nationalization of industry. Because the Democrats figured out the way to buy the love of big industry, big business, is hand them cash. As Republicans, we tried to say, let's fix the tax code so you have to compete with each other. You got to go out there and engage in creative destruction and make things better, faster. Democrats say, make the old same crap you used to make, but we're going to give you cash to do it. It's insane economics. And look, this board's a little harder to read, but we were trying to figure out if the hard left's theory of, well, we're going to have all these taxes, but we're going to sweep the assets of rich people, which is unconstitutional, and we'll find out next year if my non-lawyer legal opinion is true from the Supreme Court. But the principle of this board is CBO has told us we are heading towards 115, 120% of debt to GDP in sort of the 10-year window. With all this new taxes to Democrats, we're still pretty much about 111% of debt GDP, and this is assuming every dime comes in. It's a fraud. And this is supposed to make you feel better. Oh, we have a tax proposal. Those nasty Republicans won't let us blow up the economy. And look, I know this is hard to read, but why this is so difficult is you see these gaps. Those are functionally, these lines are basically to say, you see the gap, the tax proposals being proposed by the Democrats to save the Social Security Trust Fund get nowhere near it. And as you go up further in time, the gap gets bigger and bigger. Part of the punchline here, I need someone to process. That's in 9 years. In less time than that, Medicare Part A Trust Fund, which is about 40% of all Medicare spending, is gone. The Transportation Trust Fund is gone. And we're hitting numbers. We are hitting numbers. The 2 trillion we will borrow this year, we were not supposed to hit for a decade. We are borrowing now at rates that we were not supposed to see for years. This is the Democrats' economy. This is what sort of nationalizing much of the industry, the chips industry, now their green energy industry, handing out the cash. Something happened. We're building all these factories, but we're getting no tax receipts from it. Something's gone horribly, horribly wrong out there. And instead of our brothers and sisters on the left and those of us on the right coming together and saying, we have a moral obligation not to have baby boomers on the street as part of their retirement, not to double senior poverty. To my young kids, yes, I'm an old dad. I have a 14-month-old and an 8-year-old. Do they deserve to have a future? Because CBO math basically says in 20 years, if we wanted to maintain baseline services as they are today, we have to double taxes. That means my kids live in a world where they're dramatically poorer than how all of the rest of us have lived. And you want to know why the middle class is so cranky? Once again, back to something I said in the beginning. The middle class in this country is poorer today than they were 24 months ago. If you live in my community, if you haven't had over a 20% pay hike in the last 24 months, you are poorer today than you were before. This is the morality. So let's have the most difficult discussion this place is capable of. What are we going to do? I've come behind this microphone dozens and dozens and dozens of times showing you that if we could actually have a revolution in the cost of health care. And I've brought the ways to do it. I've brought whole sorts of charts to say, hey, did you realize diabetes is 33% of all health care spending? Could we have a revolution there? Are we really going to do the same old farm bill? Are we going to actually understand we have ways to help our brothers and sisters live healthier lives, come back into the labor force, have some economic growth, and stop watching America die? Next decade, we will have more Americans dying than being born in this country. We're dying as a society, and we're financing it ourselves. The immorality of what we're doing, whether it be the debt are the way we're hiding from it. There is hope. There is a way it works. There is a way it works. Is this place capable of actually thinking? Are we going to continue to do this, the petty, well, so-and-so hurt my feelings, so I'm going to oppose this. I'm going to like this. I'm not going to read this. Oh, this is uncomfortable. I can't go home and explain this to my Chamber of Commerce. Screw you. This is a moment of action. So I'm going to give you an absolutely radical proposal that I just want you to ruminate. I accept has no chance of passing. And I'll use this year's numbers. In the 2023 budget year, non-defense discretionary spending is, let's call it about $740 billion. About $326 billion of that is money that we're borrowing and sending to states, counties, cities. Many of them are programs I absolutely love, justice grants, other things. I have always supported these, but we're borrowing money to send to entities that have their own taxing and borrowing authority. That's the definition of insanity. For those who come in here and say, I want to defend the 10th Amendment, got a great way for you to do it. Stop borrowing money over here to send to states, and so they have to come and lobby and grovel at your office every 6 weeks. It would be hard. The hallways up and down might be depopulated because they won't be lined up at our door begging for more cash. But is it rational for us to borrow hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars over here and hand it to entities that have their own taxing authority? And to my brothers and sisters on the left, this is the punchline. You bang on me saying, well, we just need to raise taxes. Great. You control most of these cities. Go raise the taxes and make it so we stop borrowing the money. And with that, Mr. Speaker, I yield back.